in the Hasidic neighborhood in Brooklyn, there is, and again, these are articles that I saw in the paper, there was a modesty committee, self-styled by a group of men who went around, and may still be going around, watching to make sure that women were properly dressed. They approached the owner of a store and demanded that she take the mannequins out of her window. The threat was that they could be shunned by their local society. And the reason was because these mannequins, which if you look at the picture, was nothing but a blank head and a scarf, could arouse the men and boys who walk by and see the mannequins. But I have to say, the most touching story that I read was called Death of a Mannequin. It's a chapter in a book written by a woman after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. The mannequins became the preceptors of the increasingly restrictive lives that were being foisted upon the people and the women in the country. And so this woman describes how she saw the police come in with guns, point to the legs of a mannequin, and say to the owner, "You have to lengthen that dress. That dress is too short." That was the start. Then they wanted to make sure that the heads were, the hair, beautiful hair, can't see the beautiful hair, had to cover the hair up. And bit by bit, at every step of the way, the mannequins were, the owners of the stores were told that their mannequins had to be portrayed in a way that they wanted the women in Iran to dress. And the women who had been totally free to dress any way they wanted were ultimately forced to be veiled and to be completely covered, including their eyes. And the result was that the store owners, not knowing any more how to deal with this, just cut the heads of the mannequins off, and that was the way they, it was the most tragic, awful story. And she calls it Death of a Mannequin, and if anybody wants to read it, I have it here in my book. So I think that kind of covers everything that I've been interested in and researching, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Apropos double standard in cases of religious fanaticism. Some years ago, I was a chaplain in training at Beth Israel Medical Center in the city. And I was assigned the maternity ward. And of course, many Hasidic women go to Beth Israel to have their babies. The women wore the most gorgeous clothes. The bathrobes, the pajamas, the nightgowns were designer clothes of the most gorgeous fabrics. And obviously, in privacy, they do dress themselves according to fashion. It's when they're in public.
Right.
And I've heard the same thing about in Saudi Arabia and so forth.
Well, I can tell you, I traveled in Morocco many, many years ago, and we went through the Medina in Marrakesh, and after a while, I began to feel almost as if I wanted to be covered and veiled because of the leering eyes. And what I noticed on many of the women walking around, if you looked below their robes, they were wearing beautiful anklet bracelets, beautiful jewelry. So in privacy, that's where they can be themselves. It's just out in the real world is really, it's terrible.
Phyllis, this collection is magnificent. It appears to me that maybe it happened over a period of years. This is like something that was part of you for a long time that you're just now expressing.
Well, you know, I have always been interested in fashion. I graduated from FIT, and while I didn't go into designing fashion, which is what I thought I would do, I ultimately began writing about fashion. But the fashion has always been part of my background. When I began doing my photography, you know, in a serious way, I just go around, I shoot everything. But in 2003, I was on a trip and we made a stop at Corsica, and that was where I found, I'm walking along the street, and there is this mannequin standing out in the sunlight with this radiant smile, and she just sort of like was saying, "Buy me!" And I took her picture. And then I walked down the road and I found another mannequin with an equally interesting face. She too looked human. And then I found a third. And that's when I said, aha, there's something here. These all look human. Even though they had no arms, they just had something. And then I began looking for them. And so what you see is the product of many, many trips that to many other countries, but a lot of what is in New York. In fact, most of these photographs in this room are the wonderful Bergdorf Goodman holiday windows. And I've done other things in New York.
They're remarkable.
Thank
I'm an
you.
artist too, and I love looking at mannequins. And I will tell you, I've never seen the humanity in them. I just think, oh look, that's nice. And to see these, it just brings out a whole another area that most people, I don't think, see.
Well, that's what I seem to have discovered is there, after the opening, there were people who spoke to me about the emotional connection they were making to these mannequins. And the most interesting thing happened. I got an email from a woman in San Francisco who, I don't know if any of you saw the article that was in the Advocate or other newspapers last week. It went online and she got it because she has a Google alert about anything that relates to mannequins. This is a woman who owns a mannequin warehouse. And I went online and that place is absolutely amazing. If anybody is interested in mannequins, mannequin parts, I mean, she's told me that artists use mannequins, may get a mannequin and then cover it with mosaic or do other things with it. So if anybody is interested in it at all, I will give you her website. And she invited me to come to San Francisco and visit her mannequin warehouse, which I'm thinking about would be another wonderful trip.
But also, I think what's become clear is every time we send out an invitation, you know, I get 2 or 3 emails, just sort of from people I've never heard from before on this topic, who are just obviously really fascinated by it, have an emotional connection to it, you know, think that there's just so much there that they've never thought about before. And something about your work really draws that out from people.
Well, yes.
Do you make changes? For example, there's one there with an interesting background, the red.
Are you talking about that one?
No,
With
that
the
one.
one, the red background?
Yeah, right.
No, I shoot what I see. And in many cases, in most cases, I shoot through glass. And so I try to either incorporate the reflection as part of the composition or work around it somehow, and try to stand at an angle that will lessen the reflection.
And the other question is, people will laugh, how about male mannequins?
Yes.
What would be different in male mannequins from what you were saying about female mannequins?
I don't think there really is a difference, because I actually have 6 or 7 male mannequins on display, which I'd never shown before. But from what I could tell, particularly in Istanbul, and I can't tell you why, but there's a very big shopping street in Istanbul which had the most amazing and wonderful collection of male mannequins, which I have several of them up there. And I think that they are serving the same purpose. They are selling their clothing and just get me into the store, and you know, that's, but I think men have just as much interest in dressing well and looking, you know, none of the ones I have are the kind of elegant Brooks Brothers sort of thing, but I think they speak to people, to men in the same way.
Except they can have their trousers above their ankles.
Yes.
I'm listening to your connecting the mannequins to fashion and and power and aspiration, but I think you've transcended, I know mannequins have a commercial purpose, but I think these images transcend it. I don't even feel fashion when I look at them. I feel, you know, aspirational. You know, I want to be that person, or I want to be so casual sitting in Como. I just think you've done a lot more than express a fashion component. I think it's more avatar-like to me, or you know, something that expresses what we want to be or how we want to live.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, but I think one of the ways that I approach this, and I go back to the Impressionist world, I am treating them somewhat satirically, as if they were the fashion trendsetters of their day. So instead of treating them as mannequins, I'm treating them as if they were real women or men who wanted their portraits painted. And so here are the portraits, because those men and women in that day were the fashion trendsetters. I mean, there were no photographs if you go back far enough, and so they became the inspiration for other women and other men to dress that way. And it's interesting because I'm just reading a biography of Benjamin Disraeli. He had a very interesting background, and one of the things that he had to learn, as described earlier in the book, is how to dress properly for British society to accept him as who he wanted to be. He wasn't that person yet, but if he figured out how to wear the proper clothes, that would now put him right where he wanted to be.
What's that ad campaign, the clothes make the man?
Yeah, there you go.
And the
And
woman. And the woman, of course. Yeah. Well, and something that would be maybe an interesting exercise for all of us is to go back and look at them now, and look at the male mannequins and see if you notice the difference. you know, I mean, that would be interesting, I think, to Phyllis and to, you know, to
Definitely.
me, certainly.
Well, I have one other little reference that I thought was relevant. There was a study done in a psychological journey on, and this was, dressing better can change the way your brain works. So there you go.
A lot of the research, in psychology and sociology and anthropology in the last 10 to 15 years is about things that would seem to have no impact at all, but in fact do change one's internal brain chemistry. So, you know, positive self-statements, and I mean the whole biofeedback therapy, a therapeutic approach is about, you can change your brain chemistry. You know, through meditation, you can change your brain chemistry so that you can moderate your own brain activity with things like epilepsy, with things like, even me, with chronic fatigue syndrome, with any other sorts of things. And it's very much in its beginnings. And so the science is partial because they haven't, not enough people have done it, and because they don't really understand what the heck is going on. But it's really, there certainly is very, very strong evidence that this is true. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's also the whole thing, the power dressing concept of, particularly for women, and early on as women were becoming much more involved in positions of power and influence. And it's interesting, originally women would dress like men. They would wear suits with little bow ties or something because that was considered the power dressing kind of thing. But today women dress as women and they can be in the most powerful position, but they are going to recognize, and we will come to recognize that women have that position, and that's where they should be. They're women. Let's be who we are.
any other questions?
A comment. I'm not sure that I can articulate this very well, but your work reminds me a lot of Cindy Sherman's work, which is kind of the exact opposite of Mannequins, where she takes herself and makes her, creates different personas.
Yes, yes.
And so it's the opposite, where she's making herself almost inanimate. But it reminds me a lot of her work.
Well, thank you. I find that to be a very wonderful compliment. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
So, I think that I just wanted to, for those who are interested, to look at the price list and